What we do here is go back.
How's it going, everyone, and welcome to episode 31 of the Lost Media podcast. Today we're talking about the Censored 11, a selection of 11 cartoons that were banned for more than 40 years. These were Merry Melodies cartoons, one was a Looney Tunes cartoon, but these aren't the ones you remember watching on a Saturday morning when you were a kid. These weren't allowed to go to air unless they were a special presentation on television to talk about how things have changed and how these are not acceptable nowadays, and also to sort of act as a history lesson to what was acceptable back then, but what we've learnt from the past. There's a lot of them, 11, and they are quite shocking to look at these days. Back then it was entertainment. Back then they got rave reviews. I'm sure a lot of those reviews were from African Americans, they were all from white people. And it's just a very sad thing to look back on. The fact that this was the times back then. The fact that people thought that this was acceptable. I'm going to go through all of them loosely. I'm not going to go through all of them properly and explain the plot. If you want to see that, click on the video in the description, the one that's playing behind me by L Supersonic Q. He goes through every single Censored 11 cartoon and does an amazing job explaining the plot and the storylines of all of them. It's a great video, check that one out. But I'm going to loosely talk about the plot of all of them and also explain very easily, well, I don't have to explain, it's on the screen, why these were banned. And I'm also going to talk about how they became found and how some of them were lost for more than 40 years and even beyond, because the advent of YouTube meant that a lot of these were able to be uploaded and shown to the public, when previously some of them were just completely outlawed. Some of them were on home media releases, some of them had clips uploaded on home media releases, others had little spots on television to talk about how cartoons back then were allowed to get away with a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have been able to get away with. And some just slipped through the cracks. And when YouTube came along in 2005, it was more 2011 onwards where these were found on old VHS tapes recorded or through archives and were uploaded to the internet. And all of a sudden, all Censored 11 cartoons had returned. And they are good that they're actually uploaded, in my opinion, because they act as an example of what not to do and why times have changed and why this shouldn't be a practice on television ever again, obviously. It's one of those sign of the times things where people thought that was acceptable back then, and we use it as education to show people, hey, this is what people thought was acceptable back then, and this is how much times have changed and how much we like to think that we've moved on from doing very offensive things and offensive cartoons that obviously people who are from an ethnic background or who are African American or just anyone that's black colored skin would watch this and just be extremely offended by what they're seeing and hurt by what people think of them or how they're portrayed on television. So I'm going to go through all of them. The first one is All This and Rabbit Stew. And this is a hunter who is going up against Bugs Bunny and is just kind of acting dopey through the whole thing. He's just moping around, acting all, silly, and it's just sort of a dopey portrayal of an African American. It seems to be an alternate version of Elmer Fudd, but it obviously is a really over-exaggerated African American. That's the whole point of it. Excuse me. The next one is the Isle of Pingo Pongo. I mean, the title sort of gives away how over the top this is. It's about people coming from New York to a small island of Africa, and they go and see the villagers, the native people, and they start singing jazz and banging drums. And it's obviously an over-exaggerated portrayal of natives, and it's it's in poor taste. That's what you call it today. But back then, this was deemed as a really award-winning cartoon that's really acceptable. You guys got to remember that in the 40s, 50s, even the 60s, especially the 30s and 40s though, this was deemed as like a cultural learning, a way of learning about other cultures. But nowadays we look back on it and it's like, this is not teaching anyone anything. This is teaching people an over-exaggerated and false example of what these cultures were like and what they were into, and it's just not the case. That's all there is I have to say about that one. Angel Puss is another one, and it's about a black character that's about to drown a cat, and the cat's trying to convince him out of it, or maybe he's convincing him to drown him and then guilt tripping him that he drowned the cat. And it's just, again, it's the same thing in the previous two cartoons. It's an over-exaggerated black character that is obviously very offensive to anyone who watches this and, you know, takes in the information that's happening and what they're seeing. A lot of these cartoons share a similar narrative, and there's no intelligent black characters in them. They're all kind of just displaying black people for what they saw them as back then, or what the cartoon creators saw them as, and what they thought was worthy of entertainment. That's how it became the Censored 11, guys. Turner Classic Television actually re-aired most of these. I think they aired 9 of the Censored 11. They didn't air the last 2. I'm not sure which 2 weren't aired. You have to check out El Supersonic Q's video, which is no doubt much better than this one. This is just a podcast form, or I'm trying to explain it in the most, I guess, basic of terms, because in my opinion, all of these cartoons kind of mesh into one in terms of how offensive they are, in terms of how inaccurate they obviously are. I mean, it's just a silly portrayal of something that clearly is not the case. And back then, I think they knew it wasn't the case, but they thought this was acceptable and entertaining. This happened a lot in Australian television, even as recent as the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and the 2000s, 2010s. So embarrassing. Australia, if you guys don't know, is an extremely racist country, and a lot of people from Australia don't understand when they're being racist. That's a bit of a sidetrack. The next one I'm going to talk about is Jungle Jitters. This one's essentially kind of similar to the Isle of Pingo Pongo. They're all kind of obviously over-exaggerated stereotypes, and a character that's similar to Elmer Fudd, I think it's an earlier version of Elmer Fudd, goes and sees the villagers, and they all threaten to you know, cook him up and eat him, and they're all kind of dancing around like savages. And again, it's just a portrayal, like I've said in all the other ones, of, hey, African people are savages and these are the villagers, and Elmer Fudd, oh, the hilarity, he's got to escape this situation. Will he escape out of this terrible scenario? Ridiculous. Hitting the Trail's another one. This is a much earlier cartoon, I'm guessing, because obviously it's black and white style, which is interesting, and it takes place on a rowboat. I don't actually know much of this other than obviously it's meant to portray a scared, afraid African person, African American, and it's obviously extremely offensive, like all the other ones. That's as much information as I have about that, guys. The same thing I've said about all the other ones. It's just a very early example of where they were going with this, and how you could obviously tell the underlying messages of what they were saying throughout this cartoon. He gets scared on the rowboat, he jumps off, and he goes into the cemetery, and he's scared by all these white skeletons, and it's silly. It's just one of those silly things. Hitting the Trail for Hallelujah Land is the full name of this one. And they're all kind of, it's that stereotype of they've all got banjos and they're all hick in the country and kind of just doing their thing type, what they thought they were going for. I'm guessing when they made these, they thought they were humbling and a good representation, and were actually a tribute to African people. I didn't think all of them were made with that intention, but I actually think some of them were. Tex Avery and Fred Avery were in charge of a lot of these, and those names are very synonymous in Warner Brothers and the history of Merry Melodies. They've done a lot of things to do with Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, and when they were interviewed about these, they kind of weren't sure. Like, they hated how they were banned and hated how they were being not aired, and they wanted these to be shown. And I don't think they ever, you guys can correct me on this in the comments actually, their position on whether they did the wrong thing was ever announced, because they did die quite a long time ago. But I do know that when they were interviewed, they weren't happy that these weren't being allowed to be aired and were being banned. Another one is Uncle Tom's Bungalow. And this basically portrays a little African girl and an old man who's... It's set in the slavery era. And it's kind of just in that tone of, here's our situation, we're poor, and it's just a sad sort of example of, I don't know, them trying to tell a historical story, but it just falling completely by the wayside, honestly. There's not much really to it from what I've gained and what I've seen from it. It's just like all the other ones. We've got a little girl, black character who's acting just as silly and over the top as all the others, and we've got a grandpa that's walking along talking to the audience and is acting, unintelligent, I think, is why these weren't perceived. They're acting unintelligent, these characters, and that's why it's, of course, deemed offensive, because you want your community, you want your race to be portrayed in a normal way. I think that's all it is. You don't want them always to be portrayed in an intelligent way, but it needs to be portrayed in a very normal sense, and that's not what was happening in especially Uncle Tom's Bungalow. Sunday Go Meetin' Time is essentially a play on Church Day and African Americans going to church, and all it really is these are what these people are like, what the cartoonists think these people are like. I'm saying the same shit about all of them because they all really do blend into the one thing. It's just this over-exaggerated portrayal of African Americans that is not at all accurate. Clean Pastures, though, that's another one I'm not... Sorry. Sunday Go Meetin' Time is one, obviously, I'm not very familiar with, of all the Censored 11. But yeah, basically Church Day and a community of African Americans is what it sort of is representing in that one. Clean Pastures is the jazz scene in Harlem. And it's kind of portrays African Americans as, drinking heaps, dancing heaps, and the swing scene of Harlem, and just kind of portrays, them all as, this is the, I guess, low socioeconomic community going and having a good time. But again, not accurate in any sense of the words. Goldilocks and the Jivin' Bears. The piano sets on fire. I've literally no clue what's happening in this, and they've got to jive out the fire, and you get the idea. It's bears, and they're all black characters, and they've got to save Goldilocks, and it's a musical number, and just these cartoons, they're great for a historical sense. I definitely think they should be released, personally. Again, I'll reiterate that. But looking back at them, you really look back and you go, wow. I can't believe this was a thing back then. Like, people thought this was worth making and was really accurate. Not at all. Not at all, guys. And I guess we get to the more infamous one, Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves. In the title, you can tell as already a racist, what is now deemed as a racist slur. This is meant to be a black Snow White and seven black dwarves, except they're the seven dwarves, and it's set in wartime. That's all I really know about it. They're just in the army camp, and this one's just ridiculous, honestly. They're all ridiculous. They're all completely over the top. But it's, yeah, again, a lot of musical numbers and a lot of seriously over the top black characters. I think this one's remembered because of how over the top it was. But the person who made it apparently was just vehemently defending it. I mean, obviously they would have been back in the day. You got to remember that the people who made these just had no clue what they were doing. They just did not understand where they were going wrong and how this could be hurtful and offensive. Yeah. Education has been an important part of history. The last one of the Censored 11, God, I hope I haven't left any of them out. I'm pretty sure I haven't, but I've gone over them, as you guys can tell, very briefly. You can already tell by watching this, I'm not very familiar with all of these cartoons. I'm familiar with some of them, probably 4 or 5 out of the Censored 11. I've just gone through these to talk about the lost aspect, which I'm about to get to, and to also talk about how they all blend into one. You know, they're all the same offensive, you know, not accurate portrayal of stereotypes kind of cartoons that just are a product of their time. That's what you call them. And a time that was not educated. Let's just say that. Tin Pan Alley Cats is a play on Fats Domino. I think that's... No, I know the jazz artist Fats Domino because I saw him in a film called Be Kind Rewind. They were doing a tribute of him. And they're just kind of using him as a caricature in this cartoon. And he's doing his thing with jazz. And he's like, I think he's an alley cat that resembles Fats Domino. And yeah, he was a famous pioneer of the jazz scene in Harlem. And to get represented in a cartoon like this is a bit of a shame. Let's just say that. So there you have it, guys, the Censored 11. Like I said, if you want a proper detailed plot and description and not just, here's what I think is happening in these, because I'm not at all familiar with these. I did not watch them ever. I've only seen them very, very recently, and I obviously haven't garnered enough from seeing them recently to give you guys a detailed example of what they're all about and the plot of all of them, which I don't think is relevant, but I also don't want to sound like I'm just mumbling and stumbling and saying the same thing over and over, which I think I did do a few times trying to explain these, just kind of because they all do blend into one when you don't know the exact details and plot of all of those. So like I said, go see El Supersonic Q's video. It's very big on YouTube, 2.3 million views, and it is a much better example if you want to see all of these properly explained. I'm going to talk about the lost aspect really briefly. I find it very interesting that the advent of YouTube coming along and the internet becoming a big thing made some of these discovered. I'm interested to find out more about which ones might have been uploaded that were not available in the public domain. I don't think there were many. I think Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves was one of them, but you can correct me in the comments there. But yes, banned, lost media, same thing. If something's banned for 40 years, it's essentially lost to the viewing public, I mean. That's what lost media is. It's media that can't be found to the viewing public, so it's deemed as lost media. Banned media, same thing. If it's in an archives and it's not available for everyone to watch, it's lost media. Lost media became a thing because of YouTube. You know, a lot of media being uploaded on YouTube, including the Censored 11, and just a bunch of things. And then it was more about what's now lost than what's not found. And that's how it kind of grew. I guess I'm going off topic here, but all I'll say about these is the only interesting aspect for me, well, the not sad aspect for me, is the fact that some of these were just lost to time, and it was YouTube in 2011 uploads that made them found after all those years, especially the ones that only featured clips in home media releases. A lot of these were in home media releases, but just never aired on television again. And some of these were brought back with YouTube and never released in home media or on that Turner Classic Television special. And there you go, guys. The Censored 11, an example of what people thought at the time, what white people thought at the time was acceptable, and what they thought was just fine in the creation of cartoons and the Merry Melodies. That was a long lost media special. like a Lost Media special. I've gone back in the day. I've got a series coming up called Where Are They Now? Lost Media, and they're from the Lost Media specials I used to make on Sam's Movies, and that's why I've just got confused just then. The Lost Media podcast, that was episode 31. Like I said, roast me in the comments if you think I just said the same thing over and over again about each one. I probably should have just name dropped all of them instead of trying to explain all of them. There were some of them I wanted to explain the plot for. That's why I talked about all of them. But yes, I did say the same thing about multiple of them, that they're obviously offensive, which is a no-brainer at this point. But thank you guys so much for watching. Yes, I've got that Lost Media Where Are They Now series, one a day of those, and also a bunch of other content coming out. I've only got 4 or 5 more days. I think including today, it's 4 more days of uploading 2 a day, and then I'm going to have a little break because it's been a lot of podcasts to start this YouTube channel up. But my gosh, I love your support. Some of the comments have been so lovely. I really appreciate it. A lot of the comments have been really, really nice. So thank you guys so much. Keep it coming. Comment, like, subscribe, do your thing. And as always, have a nice day, Stereophonics. I've dropped that song, name dropped that song again. There's more than just one song.